The wind howled across the dry plains as a small, rickety wagon rolled toward the farthest edge of the territory. Inside sat a young woman named Clara, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the wooden floor as if the dust and cracks might swallow her fear. This was not a journey of dreams, it was a journey of necessity. Clara had grown up hearing the same words, whispered behind her back. Plain, forgettable, not pretty enough. Her older sisters had married well, chosen by suitors who admired bright smiles and soft beauty. Clara was different. She was quiet, practical, honest to a fault. When money ran out and debts piled high, her parents answered an advertisement placed by a lonely rancher seeking a wife. That rancher was Ethan Cole, a man known for his skill with horses and his silence. After a past filled with betrayal, one woman who had married him only to steal and disappear with his savings, Ethan lost faith in charm and sweet words. He didn't want glittering smiles anymore. He wanted something real. When Clara arrived at the ranch, the place felt more like a test than a home. The house stood strong but bare, filled with the kind of quiet that pressed against the ears. Ethan opened the door himself. He was tall, sun-worn, with tired eyes that had seen too many broken promises. Neither of them smiled. Clara studied and felt the weight of expectation settle into her bones. She knew what men expected: beauty, charm, softness. She had none of those things, only honesty. That evening, they sat at the small wooden table, the lamp flickering between them. Silence stretched long and heavy until Clara could barely breathe. Should say something, she thought. Her fingers twisted in her apron as she finally lifted her head. Her voice, when it came, was barely more than a breath. "I'm not pretty." The words dropped into the room like a stone into a well. Ethan didn't laugh. He didn't look disappointed. He didn't look away. He studied her for a long moment, as if measuring not her face, but her courage. "That's fine," he said quietly. "I need honest, not fancy." The simplicity of his reply stunned her. Clara's heart, so used to bracing for cruelty, didn't know how to respond to kindness. She nodded, unsure if he was serious, unsure if safety could truly exist in a place like this. Ethan wasn't a man of grand gestures. He didn't promise love or comfort or easy days. Instead, he handed her a cup of warm tea and showed her the small room that would be hers. "You're safe here," he said, that night, lying on the narrow bed. Clara stared at the ceiling and felt something strange settle over her fear. Possibility outside, the wind still roared, and the world remained harsh and unkind. But inside that quiet ranch house, something softer had begun to broken souls, choosing honesty instead of pretending. This was not a fairy tale. It was not instant love. It was the beginning of trust, and sometimes trust is more powerful than beauty. Morning came quietly to the ranch, wrapped in pale sunlight and the soft sounds of wind moving through dry grass. Clara woke before the sun. Unsure of what she was allowed to do, and afraid of doing nothing, she sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the unfamiliar silence of the house in her old home. Mornings were filled with sharp voices and rushing footsteps. Here, everything felt like it was holding its breath. She tied her hair back, smoothed her plain dress, and stepped outside. The land stretched endlessly, golden and dusted with frost. She spotted Ethan in the distance, working with a restless horse. Even from afar, he seemed like a part of the landsteady, quiet and rooted to the soil beneath his boots. Clara didn't know ranch work, but she knew hard work. Without being asked, she picked up a bucket and started drawing water from the well. Her hands shook from the cold metal, but she didn't stop. Then she swept the porch, gathered firewood, and tried to fix a loose hinge on the chicken coop door. She failed twice. On the third try, the hinge held Dot. When Ethan finally noticed what she was doing, he didn't say anything at first. He simply watched. He had seen women pretend to try. He had seen softness used as a performance. What he saw now was no performance, just effort, honest, and UNPO, LISHED. At breakfast, he placed fresh bread and eggs in front of her. "You don't have to prove yourself," he said gruffly. "I'm not," Clara replied softly. "I'm just being useful." Those words stayed with him longer than he expected. Later that day, a neighbor rode by. Mr. Harlan was known for sharp eyes and sharper words. "So this is the bride," Harlan said, barely lowering his voice. "Thought you'd bring home someone different." Clara froze. She stared at the ground, old shame rising like a storm inside her, before she could retreat into silence. Ethan stepped forward. "She's exactly what I asked for," he said, voice low but firm. Harlan shrugged and rode away, but Clara felt something shift inside her. For the first time, someone had defended her without hesitation. That afternoon, a storm rolled in faster than expected. The sky turned dark, and the wind picked up, howling like a warning. Ethan went out to secure the fences when a section collapsed. Under the pressure of the wind, Clara saw it happen from the porch. Fear hit her first, then resolve. She gathered her skirts and ran into the storm. Rain soaked her clothing. Mud clung to her boots, and her hands ached as she helped him lift the heavy wooden posts back into place. She slipped once, scraping her palms. But she didn't stop. When the storm finally passed, both of them stood there, soaked and breathless. "You didn't have to come," Ethan said. "I wanted to," she answered quietly. That moment, more than words, began to build something fragile and real between them. That night, as she cleaned her scraped hands, Ethan left a small cloth and a cup of warm water by her door. No fancy words, no grand gestures, just care. Lying in bed, Clara realized something had changed. She wasn't just surviving, she was slowly becoming seen. And in the quiet of the ranch, honesty was beginning to feel like a strength, not a weakness. The ranch had begun to feel different. The silence wasn't so heavy anymore. The rooms slowly filled with small sounds, footsteps, soft breathing, the scrape of chairs, the hum of a life slowly taking shape. Clara found comfort in routine. Chores, warm meals, quiet evenings. It wasn't perfect, but it was steady, and for her, steady was something she had never known. One afternoon, while hanging freshly washed clothes on the line, Clara heard hoofbeats approaching. 2 riders stopped at the fence. A woman and a man well-dressed, polished, smiling to easily. Ethan stiffened beside her. The man spoke first. "Didn't expect you to be married so fast, Cole." Clara sensed that this wasn't a friendly visit. The woman's eyes swept over the ranch, then over Clara, slow and judging. "So this is her." Ethan's jaw tightened. "This is Clara." Silence stretched again. When the visitors finally left, Clara noticed the tension in Ethan's shoulders. Something old had been stirred. That night, after dinner, Clara found him sitting alone on the wooden steps. The moonlight brushed silver over his tired face. She hesitated, then sat beside him. "You don't have to tell me," she said gently, "but I think she hurt you." He didn't answer immediately. "She took everything," he said finally. "Money, papers, trust." Clara's chest tightened. It made sense, now the quiet, the distance, the caution in his every movement. "I won't," Clara said. He glanced at her. "You won't what?" "I won't lie. I won't pretend. I won't take what isn't mine." He studied her, not her dress, not her face, her eyes. All he saw there was truth. The next day, Clara's past came knocking to dot her mother's letter, arrived in the afternoon, tied with familiar twine. "Your sisters have found suitors. The debt is worse. I hope he treats you kindly. Pray you are useful enough to keep." There was no warmth in the words, only reminder, only pressure. Clara folded the letter slowly. She didn't cry. She was tired of crying for people who only needed her when they were desperate. That evening, she worked longer in the kitchen, kneading bread hard enough that her hands trembled. Ethan noticed. "You can send them money," he said quietly. "If you need to." She shook her head. "I've been useful my whole life," she whispered, "but I've never been wanted." The words hung in the air like a fragile truth. Ethan stood, walked closer, stopped just a careful distance away. "You are wanted here," he said. "No promise of love. No pretty lies, just plain truth." Later that night, the wind started again, rattling the shutters. Clara lay awake, thinking of everything that had led her here. Of all the names she'd been called, of the way beauty had decided worth in her world. Yet in this quiet house, she was not wrong. She was not unwanted. She was simply enough. Outside, the prairie stretched wide and silent. Inside, 2 wounded hearts sat in separate rooms, both learning the same lesson. Honesty had brought them together, and honesty might be the thing that finally kept them. Life on the ranch settled. into something almost gentle. Mornings began with quiet glances instead of fear. Hands brushed by accident and paused and not pulled away, not rushed. There were still walls between them, but now those walls had small cracks where light could slip through. Clara learned the horses' names, learned which chickens bit and which ones followed, learned how to make coffee strong enough for Ethan. Without him having to say a word, Ethan learned quieter things. He learned how she hummed softly while sweeping, how she left half her biscuit untouched, just in case he was still hungry, how she fixed broken things without asking for praise. One afternoon, Clara heard voices outside, laughter, harsh, careless laughter. She stepped closer to the window and saw 3 riders by the fence, men from town. Their eyes weren't kind, so, "This is the famous bride Cole brought home," one of them said loudly. "Not much of a prize, is she?" Clara's fingers tightened around the cloth in her hand. She felt the old, familiar burn of shame rise inside her chest. Ethan stepped outside. Before she could retreat, "She's not your concern," he said. One man smirked. "We just thought you had better taste." For a brief second, Clara feared the silence. Feared that maybe he would laugh too. That maybe he agreed, but he didn't. "You don't get to speak about my wife," Ethan said, voice sharp as broken. Glass dot the men muttered and rode off, their laughter fading into dust. Later, Clara stayed in the barn longer than usual, brushing down a horse that didn't need brushing. She didn't want him to see how much it hurt. Ethan found her anyway. "You don't have to hide," he said. She didn't look up. "I don't think I'm hiding," she whispered. "I think I'm just tired of being looked at like something." Lacking? He leaned against the stall door, far enough not to crowd her. "They don't see what matters," he said. "I do." That night, for the first time, he slept without locking his door. He didn't tell her, he didn't announce it, he just trusted. In the early hours of the morning, a sound woke Clara from sleep. A soft thud. She froze. Fear crawled through her body. Then she heard his voice. "Just me, a bad dream." He was standing in the hallway, fully awake now, more embarrassed than afraid. Clara stepped forward, unsure if she should reach out. "I don't dream much," he admitted quietly, "but when I do, it's not kind." She hesitated only a second before placing her hand gently over his. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. It was the first time she had ever made a promise out loud. The house fell quiet again. The darkness didn't feel so thick in the space between them. Something fragile began to take shape. Not love, not yet, but safety. And sometimes, safety is the soil love grows from. Here is part 5 of the story, about 600 words. Part 5. The storm inside the sky stayed clear for days, but the air felt heavy. Something was coming. Clara could feel it in the way the birds went silent before sunset, and the way the horses shifted nervously in their stalls. She had learned the signs of the ranch, but she was still learning the signs inside herself. She was beginning to care, and caring was dangerous. That afternoon, Ethan returned later than usual from town. His boots were dusty, and his jaw was tight, the way it got when something was troubling him. "You all right?" Clara asked from the doorway. He nodded too quickly. That night, while cleaning the table, Clara overheard voices outside. She moved quietly to the half-open window. "Never should have trusted her," one man said. Said she wasn't like the others. Another replied, her heart tightened. They weren't talking about her, they were talking about him. The neighbors believed what they wanted to believe, that a man who'd been betrayed once would be betrayed again, that a plain girl couldn't possibly stay, couldn't possibly care. Clara folded the cloth slowly, hands trembling. Later, she found Ethan sitting alone by the fence, staring into the dark fields. "They think you'll leave," he said without looking at her. She stepped closer. "They think I'll take what I can and disappear," he added. She swallowed. "And what do you think?" she asked softly. He turned to her then. For the first time, the fear wasn't hidden. It was bare and honest. I don't know. The word hurt more than if he'd accused her, but she understood. That night, the storm finally came. Wind tore across the land, thunder breaking the silence apart like shattered glass. The rain didn't fall gently. It crashed. Clara was awakened by the sound of something heavy. Falling outside, she didn't think she ran. The barn door had blown loose. Rain whipped into her face as she fought it back into place. The horses were frightened, stamping, and restless. Then she saw him, struggling alone against a wooden beam that had come loose. "Ethan," she shouted, running toward him. Together, they lifted it, hands slipping, muscles shaking, rain blinding. It took every ounce of strength, but they did it. When it was over, they stood there in the storm, soaked and silent. His voice was low, almost broken. "You didn't have to come." She looked at him. "Yes," she said, and for the first time he didn't argue. Later, inside the house, she wrapped his injured hand without being asked. "He didn't pull away. You could still leave," he said quietly. She tied the cloth firmly. "But I won't." Something shifted between them, not loud, not dramatic, just real. He didn't reach for her. He didn't say grand words. He just let the silence sit differently. Later, when the storm had passed and the house rested in quiet again, Clara realized something. This wasn't about beauty. This wasn't about being chosen because she was pretty. This was about standing in the rain with someone who didn't run, and maybe that mattered. More than anything, send 6 when you're ready to continue. Ranch looked washed clean after the storm. The air smelled of wet earth, and the sky felt wider, lighter. Puddles reflected the blue above, and for the first time since Clara had arrived, the land seemed to breathe along with her. She noticed small changes. Ethan began leaving his hat on the hook by the door instead of keeping it in his hands like a shield. He started sitting at the table with her instead of across from her. He asked, not told, what she thought about small things. "Fence near the creek needs fixing," he said one morning. "Think it can wait a day?" She surprised herself by answering, "I think it'll hold. Sky's too quiet for rain." He almost smiled. Almost one afternoon, Clara found an old box in the storage room while cleaning. Inside were forgotten things, old horseshoes, worn gloves, and a small faded photograph. A woman stood beside a younger Ethan. Her smile was bright. Her hand rested lightly on his shoulder. Clara felt her chest tighten, but she didn't hide the photos that evening. She placed it gently beside him on the table. "I found this," she said. His fingers stiffened around the edge of the paper. "That was before," he said. Clara nodded. "I'm not asking you to erase it." The honesty between them felt like something fragile they both held carefully. That night, a small thing happened, a small thing that meant everything. Clara fell asleep by the fire while mending a shirt. She didn't remember drifting off, only the warmth. When she woke up, there was a blanket over her shoulders, and the fire had been carefully banked. Ethan hadn't woken her. He'd just cared quietly. Somewhere in the middle of that night, a distant howl of a coyote echoed across the land. Clara stirred, restless. She found him on the porch. "You can't sleep?" she asked. He shook his head. "You?" he asked. "Not really." They stood there together, shoulders barely touching. "I used to think quiet meant empty," Ethan said. "Now it just feels different." She didn't ask him to explain. She understood. The next day, something unexpected happened. A traveling preacher came by the ranch, seeking water and shelter. He looked at them and smiled. "You two don't talk much," he observed. "No," Ethan said, "but you stand close." The man said. Clara flushed. Ethan didn't deny it. After the preacher left, Clara felt something blooming in her chest, a warmth, a quiet happiness she didn't have words for. That evening, as they washed dishes together, Ethan said quietly, "You hum when you're thinking." She froze. "You notice that?" He nodded once. "I notice things now." The words lingered in the air. And Clara realized something. He wasn't falling in love with a face. He was learning the sound of her breathing, the rhythm of her hands, the truth of her heart, and she wasn't scared anymore. Not of the quiet, not of him, not of the space between them. The sun rose slowly, brushing gold across the fields. For once, Clara felt rested when she awoke, not just in her body but in her heart. She moved through the house like she belonged there. That thought frightened her. Belonging meant attachment. Attachment meant the risk of loss. Outside, Ethan was repairing a fence post when a rider appeared on the horizon. The horse moved quickly, urgently. Clara felt the knot form in her stomach. Before the rider ever reached the gate, it was her brother, Thomas. He looked smaller than she remembered, thinner, with worry written deep into his face. "Clara," he said, stepping down from the horse. "You have to come home." Ethan stiffened. "For what?" Clara asked. The debt got worse, Thomas said. Father's sick. The land, it's nearly gone. The words hit like cold rain. Her old life had come knocking that night. Clara sat at the table, staring at the letter her brother had left. Behind it was filled with familiar pressure, wrapped in softer words. You're our only hope. She looked at the walls, the quiet corners, the chair where Ethan always sat, the place where she had learned how to breathe again. Ethan spoke softly. You should go. The words weren't cruel, they were careful. She looked up at him. You don't want me to stay. He held her gaze. I don't want you to stay because you feel trapped. Tears burned in her eyes. He wasn't pushing her away, he was giving her a choice. No one had ever done that. That night, she didn't sleep. She walked the edge of the fence, the cool air wrapping around her. She thought of a home that had never felt like one, thought of a life built on being useful and quiet and invisible. Then she thought of this place. The quiet, the respect, the honesty. In the early light of morning, she made her decision. Her bag stayed on the hook. She didn't pack. When Ethan woke, she was already outside, repairing the chicken wire. I thought you might leave, he said. She didn't. Stop working. I thought you might ask me to. He shook his head. I wouldn't. She turned to him then. I'm staying, she said. He didn't smile. He didn't touch her. He just nodded. But in his eyes, she saw something new, relief, not because he owned her, not because she owed him, but because she had chosen him, and that made all the difference. The change was quiet, but real. After Clara chose to stay, the air between her and Ethan felt steadier, not heavier, not rushed, just honest. They moved through the days with an unspoken understanding. They were no longer two strangers living under one roof. They were something like a team. Late one afternoon, Clara rode into town alone for the first time. She had avoided it before the looks, the whispers, the way people measured women as if beauty were a kind of currency. The town was louder than she remembered, harder at the general store. Conversations fell quiet when she walked in, so that's her. Someone murmured behind the counter. The shopkeeper's eyes slid over. Her dress, her hair, her face. Didn't expect him to choose someone so simple, a woman whispered near the fabric rolls. Clara's hands trembled, just slightly. Then she straightened her shoulders. I'll have flour, sugar, and coffee, she said clearly. Her voice didn't shake when she stepped back into the sunlight. The world felt different, not kinder, but smaller. She had walked through it and hadn't broken. When she returned to the ranch, she found Ethan repairing a saddle strap. You went to town, he said. She nodded. Wasn't that bad? He didn't hide the relief in his eyes. That night, trouble arrived. Two men rode onto the property, strangers. Their horses were restless, their smiles weren't kind. This land here might be claimed soon, one said casually. Papers, change, debts move. Fear iced through Clara's veins. Ethan stepped forward, calm but unyielding. This land is paid for. The man shrugged. Doesn't always matter. After they left, the silence felt sharp. Clara found Ethan later, standing in the barn, staring at the walls as if they might fall in around him. If we lose this place, he began. She stepped closer. We won't, she said. And if something happens, we'll face it together. Together. The word felt new on her tongue, powerful. That night, she couldn't sleep. The fear of losing everything crept back in. Poverty, worthlessness. Being tossed aside, she found Ethan seated at the kitchen table. Awake? You scared? He asked. She nodded. Me too. Honest. At dawn, a wind swept across the fields, bending the tall grass like waves. Life continued. Work continued. But something had shifted. They weren't just surviving. They were protecting something together. And, somewhere between fear and fatigue, Clara realized, it wasn't beauty that gave her strength. It wasn't charm. It was courage. And being brave didn't mean not being afraid. It meant staying anyway. Winter crept in slowly. The wind grew sharper, and frost began to touch the edges of the mornings. The world shrank to the ranch, the house, the fire, and the space between them. One evening, Clara was stitching by the hearth, while Ethan cleaned. His boots, the fire crackled softly, and the silence felt warm instead of lonely. Do you ever regret it? Ethan asked suddenly. She looked up. Regret what? Choosing this, he said, gesturing around the room. She held his gaze. No. The answer surprised even her. A week later, trouble returned in human form. The woman from the faded photograph arrived at the ranch. Her dress was fine. Her smile was practiced. "I heard you were married," she said lightly to Ethan. "Thought I'd see for myself." Clara felt the familiar sting of comparison creeping in. The woman was what the world called beautiful. She stepped back, instinctively making herself smaller. But Ethan did something Clara didn't expect. He didn't turn toward the woman. "Closer to Clara, she's my wife," he said simply. The visitor raised a brow. "Not what I expected." "She's exactly what I needed," he replied. The woman's smile tightened. She didn't stay long that night. Clara sat quietly at the window. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I did," he answered. Silence filled the room again. But it wasn't empty. "I was afraid," he admitted after a while. "Of what?" "Of opening my life to someone again." She swallowed. "And now?" He looked at her. "I'm still afraid." He wasn't pretending to be strong. He was honest. And so was she. "I've been afraid my whole life," Clara said softly. "Afraid of being seen. Afraid of being chosen. Afraid of not being enough." He reached out then, just slightly, and rested his hand over hers. Not gripping, not claiming, just there. "I don't need fancy," he said quietly. She felt the words settle into her bones. Outside, snow began to fall, layer by layer. Covering the harsh ground in soft white dot, it was almost funny how beauty worked. Snow made even the roughest. Ground looked gentle, but Clara was learning something different. She didn't need to be covered in anything to be enough. She didn't need to be decorated to be valuable. She was honest, she was loyal, she was brave, and the man sitting beside her saw that night. They didn't say anything else. They didn't need to. The fire burned low. The world outside fell silent, and in that silence, two hearts sat side by side, no longer hiding, not from each other, not from themselves. Winter deepened across the plains. Snow coated the fences, the roofs, the rough earth, but inside the ranch house, warmth and light radiated softly. Clara and Ethan had settled into a rhythm, quiet but full of meaning. The chores were no longer tasks. They were shared moments, small pieces of life stitched together. One morning, Clara woke to the soft sound of the stove bubbling. Ethan was already up, tending the fire. She watched him for a moment, noticing the way the sunlight caught the lines of his weathered face. No handsome gestures, no polished words, just him, steady, reliable, honest. It was enough. It had always been enough. She moved to help him, pouring coffee and setting bread on the table. For a long moment, they simply existed together. Two ordinary people in a house that was slowly becoming a home. Waiter, outside, the ranch felt almost magical under the heavy snow. Horses pawed the ground, clouds of breath escaping them in the cold air. Clara shoveled paths, her boots crunching through the frost, while Ethan repaired a broken fence gate. Their conversation was light small observations about the weather, the animals, the world, but underneath there was a steady current of unspoken understanding. By mid-afternoon, Clara paused, leaning on her shovel. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and her hair had escaped its braid. Ethan stopped his work and looked at her. "You're more capable than you realize," he said. She blinked, surprised at the softness in his tone. She replied, trying for humor. He shook his head slightly. "No, I mean it. You faced everything the world threw at you and stayed honest, stayed yourself." "That's rare." The words sank deep. Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest, not from pride, but from the quiet acknowledgement of who she was. She didn't have to be pretty or charming, or the kind of woman the world celebrated. She only had to be honest, and here, that honesty had been enough. That evening, they sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets. Outside, the wind whistled, snow danced, and the night felt impossibly still. Clara reached for Ethan's hand. He didn't pull away. Instead, he intertwined his fingers with hers. "I never expected this," she said softly. "Expected what?" he asked. "To find someone who didn't need me to be fancy." He smiled faintly. "I didn't need fancy. I needed honest. I found that, and you." The fire crackled, punctuating the silence. Clara rested her head on his shoulder, realizing that safety, trust, and honesty had built a home far stronger than beauty ever could. They didn't need grand gestures or perfect appearances. They had each other, the land, and the quiet rhythm of life they had chosen to share. Outside, the snow continued to fall, coating the world in white. Inside, two hearts beat side by side, steady, brave, and unafraid. They had faced storms, fears, and judgment, and had emerged not just unbroken, but stronger for it. Clara whispered something almost to herself. "I'm glad I stayed." Ethan tightened his grip on her hand. "And I'm glad you did." The night deepened. The world outside could wait. Here, in this simple home on the edge of the plains, honesty had triumphed over pretense, trust over fear, and quiet courage over all the noise of the world. And in that quiet, they both knew this was more than enough. They had found what truly mattered, not beauty, not perfection, but honesty, loyalty, and hearts willing to stay. And that, they realized together, was the most beautiful thing of all.